My name is William L. Thomas. My address is 5026 Myers Lane, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45242. My date of birth is January the 10th, 1924. I entered the service in September, the Navy, 1942, and I was discharged from the service in November 1945. My service number is 634 6727. I joined the Navy out of an experience of working in the mining industry of eastern Kentucky, where there were three cousins, and we all saw the big motion pictures. Let's join the Navy, and you're in the Navy, and it sort of stirred my interest and felt that the government might need us out there. So the three of us went into Ashland, Kentucky, and signed up for the Navy, so supposedly. In the meantime, my third cousin, he backed out, and we didn't know it. And during the time that we were in the Navy, he was in the Pacific and I was in the Atlantic. And we never saw each other again after that. From there, from Ashland, I was sent to boot camp. On my way, I went to Louisville, Kentucky, and I was sworn in. And they put me on the L&N Railroad, and they put us on sleepers, and we went to Chicago. And from Chicago, we got on the interurban or the mass transit and went out to the naval base there, where I went into boot camp. Boot camp was
The Great Lakes, is it?
Great Lakes Naval Training Station. And during that experience there, I had never known anything but the Ohio River, and I saw Lake Michigan. It was really a mammoth thing for me to see. But we got our experiences in there, and I can remember getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing all kinds of exercises and learning how to, if you didn't know how to swim, you had to learn how to swim. And one thing I remember especially in boot camp was that we slept in hammocks. And that was something else, because the guys that slept in hammocks, sometimes one guy would fall out, and when he would fall out, he would grab the other guy's hammock, and that was just chain reaction. And you could hear those guys cussing and carrying on like mad when they hit the floor. But that was an experience that I remembered. And of course, when I went aboard ship, well, we didn't have hammocks, but that's what we had at that time. My assignment after graduating from boot camp was to go to my destroyer, which I had been assigned. It was the U.S.S. Greer 145, DD 145. And from there, they sent us on train to Charleston, South Carolina, to pick up the ship, which was not there. And as a result, I then was put on train again and sent to Miami, Florida. And the ship was not there. So they put us on a bus and sent us to Key West, Florida, and the ship wasn't there. And while in Key West, Florida, I had an experience of a surgery that I had to go through, and that was something that I hadn't planned on. And then another thing that happened was that some of us sailors got together and confiscated a life raft and rowed it over to an island in the distance. We saw the island, we didn't know what was there, so we rowed it over there and found out it was just a barren island. And of course we found no discoveries there, and so we went back to Key West, and nobody ever knew that we had done such a thing. But that was one of the experiences that we faced there in Key West. While in Key West, we were there for a short time, and then they put us on PC 465. That's a patrol craft. And from patrol craft, we went to, started to go to Guantanamo Bay, where I was to again look for my ship. As we went on board the ship and started down the coast toward Cuba, about part way down to Cuba, we apparently got another kind of order that we were to go up a river in Cuba, and I haven't been able to discover the name of that river. And at the end of that river was a bay, and there was a sugar mill there. And one thing we didn't know was that the guys started to go swimming in the bay and found out there were sharks in the bay. So the guys stood by with rifles while the guys kept on swimming in the bay, and nobody was taken by the sharks at that time. Uh, the we went on from there down to Guantanamo Bay on the 465, and in a short time, in a period of time, I was there at the certain receiving station. The ship that I was to go aboard arrived, and I went aboard the ship. And from there, the ship immediately proceeded to go to Boston. At Boston, we were there a short time, and they moved us on to Argentine, Newfoundland. It was at Argentine, Newfoundland that we found a convoy waiting for us there. Everything was being put together. It was about a 100-ship convoy, and so we went over on Liberty more than once while we were there. And one thing happened there that we didn't understand, we didn't think it was going to happen, and that was that we stayed too long one night over Liberty, and as a result, the boat that would take us back to our ship, which was anchored out in the bay, it was getting ready to get underway, and the boat stopped running, and we were stranded, and had to pay a price for that later on, a restriction to the ship because we had overshot our mark. We got on board our ship, and that was the beginning of a new experience as we joined with our sister ships and started for Ireland with the convoy. Well, we had we hired the boat rather, to get to our ship, and now we thought, well, here we go, and we're going to be okay. And about two days out, one evening I was in the shower, and while I was taking my shower, I heard a large noise, and certainly general quarters. And at that stage, I knew right away that we were in trouble. And what it was real trouble, because the German submarines had been waiting for us out there apparently, and they closed in on us and began to give us a real difficult time. During that period of time, these German subs were not letting up in any way. Matter of fact, during this period of almost 3 different battles that we fought with them, we lost 7 ships. And during that time, there were a large number of the survivors that were actually floating around in the rough waters of the Atlantic, and some of them were on life rafts, and we tried to rescue them. And this was one of the most painful things to see these people, these sailors out there, holding on with their frozen hands as best they could, and suddenly a wave would come along, or their hands would get so frozen they had to turn loose from the line and just be swept away in a large ocean wave. This was something that would break one's heart, because you would be talking to the person, you'd almost know them by name maybe, but at the same time you would see a wave come or the person turn loose of a line, and no matter how much begging we would do, they couldn't hold on any longer. And so we lost dozens and dozens of sailors that way. It was so devastating, because there were times when the ship captain would be forced to say break away from rescuing the sailors, because the subs are closing in, or the torpedoes are floating around out there, and we're in danger. So I can imagine how the maneuvering took place as the captain began to move his ship around. And so during the time that we were in battle, during these nights, we rented the armaments, the gunners ran out of shells, and we had to go down in the lower section of the ship and retrieve these shells. And the ship was rolling back and forth, and we formed a line to form from the ready locker down to the magazines below deck. And during that time, the ship would roll so much, and we would just be afraid of losing the shell. And there were times when I would drop to my knees to hold on to that shell, because if I dropped it, I wondered, would it explode? What would happen? But that was a very devastating time when all of these things were taking place. And there was about 3 different battles that we faced during this time in the Atlantic. I never realized that the ocean could be so wild and so ferocious, because we would look at a ship one minute, maybe a minute or two later, we'd not see the ship because it would be down below. Next time it would be up in the air, and our ship was the same way. But the time did come when we reached Ireland. It took us several days to get there, but the battle stopped days before we got there. We couldn't understand why, except the fact that maybe we might have outdistanced the submarines or got the best of them, whatever it was. They let us go at that time, and we had lost during these nights the 7 ships that I mentioned earlier. There was one of those things. Stop it. Sure. We were very thankful to get to Northern Ireland, which was Londonderry. I can remember seeing the green grass, and I thought, oh my, how thankful we were. And I can think back of all those little sailors that we lost, and even yet today, my heart breaks for knowing that we couldn't salvage those sailors. It was so we put a desperate effort in, but it just didn't work out, and the sea was against us, and everything else was against us, and we tried desperately. Some of the men even wanted to go in the water to try it, but that would have been devastating for them also. Well, from there, while we were in Ireland, we had several experiences there. Matter of fact, one was when some of the sailors went ashore and confiscated a double-decker English bus and was driving it around town at their own will. And I thought that was a very unusual and a very brazen kind of thing for them to do, but they did it anyhow, which sailors would do. And I met a girl there in Londonderry and found out, I said we were going to a dance. And so that night, the dance ended up being taking the whole family along as escorts, because they made sure that the family didn't stay at home. They went out with the dance also. But that was quite an experience. And then we made the trip back over to States, and we also, getting back to, before we got back, we rendezvoused with the aircraft carrier Santee, and for a period of time, we convoyed this carrier in the Atlantic, and then from there, we changed courses and escorted what was to be another convoy to Africa. And this went to, this ship was, the African coast was Casablanca, and it was there that we found ourselves getting acquainted with the African people a little bit. I thought it was strange that the buses were running around in town there and looked like their cook stoves on the back of them. That was the way they operated. But it was a strange thing for me anyhow. But anyhow, I took my buddy over, and we went over to shore one day, and while we was there, he drank too much and became violent, and the violence ended up in such a way that we had to call the shore patrol, and he wanted to take out some of the natives around there, but somehow we survived, and I'm sure he paid a price for that, and restrictions to the ship or something like that. Then we made our trip back from that experience, reaching port, and then the Greer was sent on a training exercise where she was actually going out of port one day, and we collided with another ship, which was a very devastating thing. The ship was a huge, big ship, but it struck the side of our ship and peeled off the torpedoes, guns, and plates of ship. I heard the noise and run for the ladder to go upstairs to see what was going on, and I got almost up to the top when I just froze. And the sailors down below me were cussing and carrying on, move it, and I just held on there. And I thank the good Lord I did hold on, because if we had gotten on top side, we would probably been right in the midst of that whole thing, because it was in process. And we had to go into port for that, and it was a devastating thing at that time. And then we had another escort situation where we were assigned to escort the admiral's ship. They called it the admiral's barge. And we were escorting it down the Atlantic coast, and it was a foggy night, and at one time the admiral ship crossed in front of our bow, and we struck it and cut it in two. In 4 minutes, it sank. We rescued all the crew but one, and we salvaged that one and put him on board ship and laid him on the ready locker, which we put the shells in, and that's the way we stored him till we got to port. But that was an interesting experience because we would walk up and down the deck and see that sailor there all stretched out, you know, and it was sort of a unusual thing, but we did it anyhow. And then from that time on, we didn't sink, but we had we could have, I guess, with all the devastating pressure that the ship had put on us because it tore the whole plates off our ship. But we survived that, and then there was another time when we were assigned to go back to Africa again, no, go back to Ireland again. So we convoyed another group, another ship convoy to Ireland, and during that time I met a wave which was over there. She was a British subject, and and I met her and dated with her, but we also got acquainted with some of the British sailors that were tied up alongside us. And it so happens that England furnished drinks for the sailors, and we shared with them in that fellowship and got acquainted with the British sailors and their ship, and that was an experience for us too. But then we came back from across the Atlantic. We had no problems, no German subs attacked us, as far as we know. Of course, you never know when you're out there how far away the German sub might be or how soon you're going to be blown out of the water. Because one of our sister ships, the Jacob Jones, I believe was the name of it, anyhow, it was blown apart, and half of it went down with the sailors, another half they went down later, and that was a devastating thing. But one torpedo that did that job. So we were very fortunate to be able to survive all those things. And then after the repairs, we escorted the French cruiser, the Gloria, from New York to Norfolk. That was an experience that we had. I mean, escorting a foreign ship down to Norfolk, but we did that with no problem. And while patrolling in the South Atlantic near Trinidad at one time, we intercepted and boarded another foreign ship. It was flying a foreign flag. So we sent over a boarding party. It was Thompson submachine guns, and we didn't know who we were intercepting, but we knew that we were going to intercept this ship, and in doing so, we stood by with our guns in case our other sailors that were going over to board the ship got in trouble. But so happened that everything worked out all right, and everybody survived, and the ship went on, and we went on and survived. But that was an experience too, because everybody was up in arms and tense at that time, not knowing what we were facing. You never knew what to expect, because sometimes we would just discuss where we were going when we were out on the sea, and they never announced to us we're going here or going there, and we just know when we ended up that's where we're going. On one occasion, we had one of our sailors had need for emergency surgery. And I think we secured from an aircraft carrier a surgeon, brought him over and on board our ship, and he performed the surgery on our ship. And the sailor survived, and the surgeon did a good job apparently. But the thing was that we had to move at a very slow speed, and the ocean was very calm, and that was necessary for the surgery to be completed. But our ship was not equipped for a surgery lab. And so it was a rough kind of thing, but he did the job anyhow. Then there was another time when we were back and we were sent to Casablanca again. And on this ship, on this time, we had no problems, but we kept on, trail. We brought our convoy over and came back. And then we were slated to operate with another carrier. And this carrier was the one that was going to be sub-hunting in the Atlantic, and we went for 57 days without touching land. It was during this time that we would go aboard, we would go alongside our carrier and take on fuel, and take on supplies and continue on our way. And they would send up their planes, and we would escort the carrier. And this was a very unusual kind of assignment, but that was our assignment at that time. And then before we came into port, we stopped in the Azores. And stopping in the Azores, Hortofado was the name of the place. And at that stage, we anchored outside for a period of time, for a night, so. And we were anchored close to other ships, and it so happened that the drifting of the ships, the anchor chain caught in one of our screws. That is the propellers that drive the ship. Our ship had two propellers, and one of the propellers was damaged by those chains from the anchor. And as a result, we had to go someplace to get help for that, because we could move at a very slow pace, and we could not be efficient as far as doing any kind of battling. So we started heading for a dry dock, and this so happened we went back to Africa and landed in a dry dock there, which was a floating one. It was not a permanent one. And while there in the dry dock, we were close to the shore, and some of the natives came out there, and we sort of set up a business with them. They wanted to buy our sheets and our dungarees, and we would negotiate prices, and then we'd send over a dungaree, and they would send over some money, and that was kind of thing, business going on there. I thought it was kind of unusual, but while we were there, that's one of the things we did. And it was a unique experience, but we survived, and while that was there, the ship got repaired, and they sent us on our way again. So we were constantly changing from one thing to another, one trip after another. And of course, not to be left out, there was one time when we were slated to go to Murmansk, Russia. And we were all geared up to go. We thought, oh my gosh, look where we're going. And we talked about it and everything, and then they changed plans all of a sudden. The plan was that we were to escort an aircraft carrier loaded with airplanes to the Soviet Union, to Murmansk, Russia, and that was to be a special mission for us. But somehow or another ship got the idea, or they changed it around, and that's the way it happens. You never know where you're going in the Navy until you just see the land when you get there. And we were so much in the dark that way, but thank goodness we survived all those events that we faced, and that was the main thing. Of course, we were always, and we were operated with so many aircraft carriers. There was one time when they were developing new aircraft carriers, and we were assigned to escort these aircraft carriers. There was a Santee, the Tulagi, the Mission Bay, the Cassin Bay, the Ranger, all of these ships. And we were scheduled to escort them out to sea and protect them at the same time. And that we did, and as a result, they were learning, and this was a special thing for them to learn as they went out to sea for their first time. But we actually been able to protect them, and we were thankful that we could do that. But on our way back to the States, we were always going back to the States because that seemed like home base. And we anchored, we were out in Bermuda, near Bermuda. So we anchored in Hamilton Harbor in Bermuda one night. And certainly, while we were there, some of the sailors immediately were over the side of the ship and went swimming. And they thought, oh, we're in Bermuda, we're swimming in Bermuda. And that lasted for a few hours, and then we were on our way again. And we followed orders, not knowing where we were going again. But during this time, like I said, we became great guessers of our imagination. And then we went back to the States, and we were down in Miami, Florida, and at that time we were given an assignment that's called playing guard. And this is where we would go out from Florida, and the planes would come from land bases and find the carrier and make 18 landings on it of a day and 18 of a night. We were escorting them all that time, and this was quite an unusual experience. And of course, we would be in and out of port and back and forth and everything like that, but it was one of the things we did. While we were doing this, they decided we needed some liberty, so they took us to Havana, Cuba. And when we went into Havana, Cuba, we lost one of our sailors. Something went wrong with the shooting the line over to the dock, and he was killed in the process. But we went on to Liberty anyhow, and I can remember meeting a girl there again, and a girl who said, if you wanted to marry me, she said, if you marry me and take me to the States, you'll always be my friend and wife and everything. And I didn't accept it. But when the one night there, I went out to a restaurant to get a dinner, and I'm telling you, I ate a steak that I never had a dinner so big in my life. That was unbelievable. It was really, after eating Navy food for so long, and sometimes K rations, and we did powdered milk and powdered eggs and powdered this and powdered that, because when we go out to sea, we could only take fresh stuff on for about a week or two, and then suddenly we were into all those powdered things. But we followed orders and did the best we could. I can remember when we used to see them throw baby liver out on the deck of the ship and what thaw out and cook it for us. And that was not a very classy thing, but they did it anyhow. Then there were times when they sent new sailors on board our ship, and they would sometimes lay on the deck and just simply be so sick that they couldn't function. And sometimes I think they would send them, they just couldn't survive on board ship and they couldn't make it. And then there are other times in the fire room, that was another experience too, because I later on went to the fire room where I moved up the line in my grade till I went to water tender first, and I had a team of 4 or 5 men under me of a steaming section, and a team under me as a supervisor of repairs, which was about 4 or 5, and we were responsible for all the things that went on in the boiler room. We had a coffee pot there that must have been a homemade one. It was a large copper vat that had a tube where steam would go through, and that would make our coffee. And that was we always, being a sailor, you always had plenty of coffee around. I can remember when they used to go to tenders, which were ships that set on the near the harbor, and Navy ships would come in and be serviced by them, and we used to talk about them setting on coffee grounds because they sat there so long, and Navy people drink so much coffee. But anyhow, we went on from there, and there was times when we would rescue some of our pilots, and that was a tragic thing because when we're really in crisis in service, they would be loaded with all their arms and everything, and sometimes they would crash into the sea, and there would be the explosions where the plane and everything would just disappear, and that was a sad thing. And there were other times when we would rescue the pilots and move on with life, but we went on with those things, just one thing after another, and it didn't end. There was another time when we were assigned in New England, up in Melville, Rhode Island. We were assigned another situation where we operated with submarines who were practicing shooting torpedoes, our own submarines, and seaplanes that also shot torpedoes. And we were to be the evaders of those torpedoes. Well, we would dodge those torpedoes as they come dashing. The planes would come in, and sometimes a torpedo would skip over the top of the ship. Sometimes one of them or two hit us at one time, but not a major damage, but it was a frightening thing to see those things coming towards you all the time. Those planes would come swooping in, and here would be the torpedoes flying in. And then the subs, of course, they were more subtle, but we were to dodge all those because we had the radar, and that was another thing, because when we first started out, we didn't have radar on the ships, and that was a very big thing, because we could scan the skies for several miles. That was a big help. And one other thing that they did upgrading on our ship, every time we went to port, they upgraded with something. They gave us what they called hedgehawks, and these hedgehawks were mini rockets, and they were designed so that we could shoot those off the deck of the ship, and they would go to a sub, wherever the sub was, if it was nearby. If it was getting closing in on us, we could use those as a defense. And along with other things we had the depth charges, which there were times when we roll out, a depth charge could be set for 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, whatever, and it would explode at that time. And that was one of the tools that we had. We had what we call K guns and Y guns, and then we rolled them off the deck of the ship. And we used all those things different times. But while we were there in Melville, Rhode Island, that's what we were doing. We'd come in every night and then go out of a day, and that's the kind of opportunities we would have to work with these carriers, work with these submarines and aircraft that were handling the torpedoes. We had made the 2 trips to Londonderry, Ireland. We made the 2 trips. At least we did make 2 trips to Casablanca, and then in that process we had covered a lot of territory. So much territory that it really gets to you sometimes. But I don't know how to think about it, but this time, but it was one of those things that just with all the experiences you go through, every one was a new experience, and that was something that I'll never forget. Now we continue on our voyage, and our voyage will take us to the intersection of some of the things that we found on board the ship. One thing for sure, we found that early on in life of the ship, we had what they called a crow's nest. And this was a place where the one seaman would be up on watch day and night to make sure that they could sight anything that needed to be observed. And as a result, that was a very important thing. But then came radar. And that was such a wonderful thing because it could reach out for miles around and reveal to us what was going on and what was out there for us. And that was a very important part of the thing that we needed to observe. So we also had sound gear, which picked up the sound of the propellers in a ship, and that was used very effectively to trap torpedoes, trap submarines, and to know which direction they're going and things like that. But then getting into the fire room, that is a world in its own. In order to get into the fire room, we had to go through what was called a pressurized air chamber. That chamber was had hatches at the bottom and hatches at the top that would be sealed up. And so when you opened one hatch, you open the other. And you had an air pressure that you would go through and then go into the fire room. The fire room consisted of 8,000 horsepower boilers. There were two sets of boilers in each fire room. And we would have 14 burners on each boiler. These boilers would drive us to about 35 knots, which was a pretty good speed. And I kind of, when I heard that they were going to replace our ships with more modern, faster ships, I wanted to say, look, we could go up to 35 knots, and you didn't go much faster than that in the new ones. But anyhow, we had a Navy captain one time, or a chief one time, that wanted he called it, he would seal the pressure of the boiler so he could get more speed out of the ship. I don't know whether that was legit or not. I don't think it was, but this was his dream, to get more speed out of the ship. But anyhow, we did that. And while we were down there in the boiler room, there were times when they would bring us through the fire room, and we would operate standing in front of these two boilers. Each one had 14 burners. And these burners would operate, you'd have so many burners, or so depending on how much fast you wanted to go, and on that way. And so that's the way we would operate. I can remember being inside of one of these boilers and what they call punching tubes, where you would have hundreds of tubes that you would punch to get the carbon or get the calcium or get the salt or salinity out of the tubes. And that's one of the things that we had to do. Another thing we had to do in the Navy, we generated our own water. We had our own system where we'd take seawater and we would evaporate it and create our own water supply. And that's our boilers ran off of that water also, because if we used straight seawater, we would be repairing our boilers immediately. But during this time, I can know sometimes we would take on water in foreign ports, and we'd have to treat it with iodine and certain things in order to purify it enough, because it wasn't safe enough for us to drink. And then there were other times when they would ration our water because everything wasn't functioning properly, or maybe evaporators were down, and that would be something we would have to attend to. And they would have to chip the salt off of the evaporator tubes in order for the evaporators to work properly. And so in the boilers, which were water tube boilers, we would have to have to brush, a wire brush that would go through each tube, and that would get the scale out of there so the boiler could operate efficiently. There are two types of boilers. One is a fire tube and one is a water tube. And the water tube, the water goes through the tubes, and in the fire tube, the water goes in another way. And it's two separate units there. But one time, I mean, later part of the Navy, part of the war, we actually took on a number of new recruits, and they were older people. I thought they were old at the time, and we would train them. We would tell them what to do and what not to do, and when general quarters would come, this is what you do. And they couldn't do anything. They would just freeze, or they would just do the wrong thing. And we had to constantly be on top of them to make sure that they would do the right thing, because they tried to do the right thing, but they couldn't keep it in mind. And we were smart, because we were young and knew everything, and that's the way it went. After leaving our duty in the New England part, where we operated with the submarines and the torpedo planes, we ended up in Philadelphia, where our ship was to be decommissioned. And during that time, I was assigned to Naval Boiler and Turbine School, and I was to pick out my own ship that I wanted to go on to go to Japan. And that was the process in which we were to operate. During the time that I was in school, I learned that my wife could be with me there, and so I'd just been recently married. I met her in the Navy while I was in the Navy. We wrote letters to each other, and while I wrote letters to hundreds of, probably dozens of other people, other girls, and a couple or three of them wanted to marry me, but I didn't get married, and so I survived. And I told my wife she was on the short list. But anyhow, we did get married and had a wonderful marriage. But she was able to. I learned that she could live with me, and we had our own apartment in Philadelphia, and we lived there until the war was over. There was the Germans first of all surrendering, and we were downtown in Philadelphia when that happened. It was a great celebration, and there's a famous picture of the sailor kissing the nurse down there, and we were down there in the midst of all that. And then there was a celebration when Japan surrendered after the bomb had been dropped, and that was not nearly as much of a celebration as the one with Germany at the time. But anyhow, we were involved in all that. And at the time of as soon as I graduated from the Naval Boiler and Turbine School, I had to make a choice, because I was faced with whether I would go with the new ship that I had selected, or where I would be discharged from the Navy. And so happened that I had what they call points. And I had enough points because of our actions and because of our being in duty and winning Battle Star, that we had enough going for us that we could get out of the Navy if we wanted to. So I chose to get out of the Navy because I had my wife there. Sometimes I look back and say, what if I'd stayed in the Navy? Wouldn't it have been something else? But I didn't. And I went home to be with my wife, and that was a choice that I made, and I never regretted it. But I never regret about being in the Navy, because that was an experience that nothing could ever excel, and nothing could ever duplicate. And I knew one thing: I didn't want to go back to the coal mines. And I said, after this, I'm going to be a different person, and I was a different person. From then on, I went back to Ashland, Kentucky, and where I started out in the Navy, and I was a different person, and I never haven't changed since. And I've been on my way to one thing after another, and that's been my life story in the Navy.
We want to name your cousins?
Yes.
Please?
The cousins that went into the Navy with me, one was named Junior Thomas, and he was the youngest of the three of us, and the other was Gerald Thomas. And the two of us had worked in the coal mines together over a period of time. And we were very close to each other, and it was sad that we didn't get together or didn't get assigned together at the same ship or something like that. But he was on landing craft and all kinds of things in the Pacific, And of course, I was in that wild North Atlantic, and that was an experience in itself, just to survive there. But we had enemies there after us too, and so we were fortunate to be able to survive the experiences that we faced there. But it was one that you look forward and look backwards, and say, look, we did something that was very important. We would all be speaking German today probably if it hadn't been for the diligent, sacrificial effort that so many of our people paid for it.